The alien Colosseum shook with the sound of thousands of voices, chanting and cheering as if the very walls would break apart. Above the massive stone arena, giant banners of alien tribes waved in the heated winds. Bright lights focused on the battlefield below, where warriors from across the galaxy came to prove their strength. Today was no different. The crowd expected a show they would remember for years. In the center of the arena, the gates creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall as a war statue, her body covered in heavy black armor lined with glowing red markings. She was the Gladiator of legends, a champion undefeated for over 10 cycles. Standing 8 feet tall, she was a monster to those who faced her. Her horns curved like blades, her eyes burning with confidence. The crowd roared her name, shaking the ground as she raised her weapon, an enormous blade carved from alien steel. But then, across from her, the other gate opened. The sound of laughter spread through the stands. Out stepped a human. He was small compared to her, a Marine wearing simple armor scratched by many battles. He held only a standard combat blade, light and unimpressive compared to the champion's massive weapon. The alien crowd laughed louder, some even throwing objects into the sand below, mocking the idea that such a fragile creature could stand in their sacred ring. The Marine walked calmly into the center, steps slow, his expression unreadable. His eyes scanned the arena, but he did not react to the laughter, the insults, or the storm of alien hatred. His silence unsettled some in the crowd. He stood firm, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his blade, as if waiting. The Gladiator laughed, a deep booming sound that echoed across the Colosseum. "Is this a joke?" she roared, her voice strong enough to make the walls tremble. She pointed her sword toward him, a human. "You send me a child of a weak species?" she paced. In circles around him, her heavy armor shaking the ground. "This will not be a battle. This will be entertainment." The crowd cheered her words, clapping, shouting, and stomping their feet. But still the Marine did not answer. He kept his head slightly lowered, his eyes locked on her movements. As if every detail mattered, the way her armor shifted, the timing of her steps, the weight of her massive blade. The alien Gladiator raised her weapon high and slammed it into the ground. The sand erupted like a small explosion. The human took one step back but did not flinch. His calm face carried no fear, only quiet focus. Some in the crowd noticed this. They leaned forward, whispering to each other. Why was the human so calm? Why was he not trembling, not begging, not shaking like the others who had faced her before? The announcer's voice boomed across the Colosseum, echoing like thunder. "Tonight, the champion of the Blood Ring faces a human Marine. A fight between the strongest of our kind and the weakest of the stars." The crowd roared again, but their words could not reach the Marine's mind. He stood ready, every muscle tight, his hand gripping his weapon like it was an extension of himself. He remembered the battles he had fought before, the friends he had lost, the harsh training that had turned him from an ordinary soldier into something sharper, harder, unbreakable. The Gladiator stepped closer, her shadow falling over him like a tower blocking out the sun. She looked down at him and smirked. "Do you have any last words, little human? Will you die quietly like your kind always does?" The Marine slowly lifted his head. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, met hers. He said nothing. The silence was heavier than her insults. That silence spread across the arena like a wave, making even the loudest voices pause for a second. The Gladiator frowned, her confidence shaken just slightly, so she did not understand why. The drums began to beat, the sound of war echoing through the Colosseum. The crowd rose to their feet. The announcer raised his arm. "Let the battle begin." The human lowered into a stance, his blade ready. The Gladiator tightened her grip on her massive sword. The entire arena held its breath. Everyone expected the fight to be short, brutal, and one-sided. Yet for the first time in her long career, the Gladiator felt a strange chill crawl down her spine. She had fought monsters, machines, and warriors stronger than any human. But never before had an opponent's silence felt so dangerous. The Marine moved one step forward, his boots pressing into the sand, and the crowd leaned closer, waiting for the clash that would decide if humanity truly belonged in the arena of giants. The first clash had not yet come, yet the atmosphere inside the Colosseum felt heavier than stone. The human marine's calm silence echoed louder than the cheering of thousands. The alien gladiator, towering over him like a dark mountain, felt something she had not felt in many battles before, an itch of unease. She decided to bury that, feeling the only way she knew. With mockery, she laughed, the sound rolling across the arena like thunder. Her voice dripped with arrogance, her words sharp enough to cut. "Look at this, my people. They dare send me a toy soldier." She pointed her enormous blade toward the human, as if he were nothing more than a shadow on the ground. What? A fragile creature, soft as clay, bones as brittle as glass. The crowd exploded with laughter, their voices cruel and wild. Aliens of every shape and size stomped their feet and clapped their claws together, chanting her name. Some even shouted insults at the human, calling him weak, calling him prey, calling him meat for the sands. But the Marine did not move. His face stayed calm, his eyes locked on the gladiator with an icy focus that felt unnatural. His silence made the crowd mock him even louder. To them, silence meant fear. To them, it meant the human had already accepted death. But the gladiator saw something else in that silence. It was not weakness. It was patience. Pathetic. She shouted again, circling him like a predator circling prey. She dragged her blade across the sand, leaving a deep scar in the ground. Sparks flew as the edge scraped the stone. Do you hide behind your silence? Do you tremble inside your fragile body? Speak, human. Show these people that your voice is as weak as your flesh. Still, he did not answer. The only sound from him was the quiet rhythm of his breathing, steady and controlled. He shifted his weight slightly, adjusting his stance, his hand tightening on the hilt of his blade. His every move spoke a language the crowd did not understand, but the gladiator, a seasoned warrior, recognized it. He was studying her. He was. Preparing, the crowd grew restless. They wanted blood. They wanted screams. They wanted the human to panic, to shout, to break. The gladiator raised her arms high, letting the lights of the arena gleam across her armor. People of the blood. "Ring!" she roared. "Tonight, I will crush the pride of humanity. Tonight, I will prove that no race is weaker than theirs." The crowd roared back, louder than before, their voices shaking the air. For them, the outcome was clear. The human would fall like all the others who had dared step into the arena. His silence meant nothing to them. His small frame meant nothing. His weapon, light and ordinary, was a joke compared to the monstrous blade she carried. She took a sudden step forward, her heavy boots slamming into the sand like a hammer strike. The ground shook under the force, sending dust into the air. She leaned close, her horned face almost level with his. Her lips curled into a smile that dripped venom. "When I break you, little human, I will not kill you quickly. I'll make..." Your people watch as their champion dies slowly, screaming, crawling, begging for mercy. Her words were meant to break him, to crush his spirit before the fight even began. But the Marine did something unexpected. He raised his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers directly, and for the briefest moment she froze. His gaze was not empty. It was sharp, unflinching, and filled with a fire she had not seen in countless opponents before. The crowd did not notice. They laughed and shouted, too busy drowning themselves in cruelty. But the gladiator felt it a chill running across her spine. She pulled back, covering her unease with another booming laugh. "You stare at me as if you believe you can win," she said, trying to turn her nervousness into mockery. "That is your greatest mistake. Hope will only make your fall more painful." Announcers' drums beat louder, echoing like thunderclaps, pushing the tension higher. The crowd stomped in rhythm, calling for the first strike. The gladiator tightened her grip on her blade and raised it high, preparing to make the crowd scream with delight. But as she raised her weapon, the human shifted his stance once more, his shoulders lowering, his blade angled with precision. It was a small movement, almost invisible to most, but to her it felt like a declaration. It was as if he had just told her without words, I am ready, and you should be afraid. Her mocking smile faltered, just for an instant, before she growled and shook the doubt from her mind. Then come, human, she hissed under her breath. Show me if your silence hides courage or only death. And, with that, the second stage of the battle was about to begin, not with swords, but with wills clashing in the heart of the arena. The drums stopped. The crowd went silent. For one long moment, the arena felt like the heart of the galaxy had stopped beating. All eyes were on the two figures standing in the center, the giant alien Gladiator and the lone human Marine. Gladiator was the first to move. With a roar that shook the air, she swung her massive blade down with the force of a falling mountain. Sand exploded as the weapon cut through the arena floor, leaving a deep scar in the ground. The sound was deafening, like thunder splitting stone. The human did not meet the blow head-on. At the very last second, he stepped aside, the blade missing him by inches. The crowd gasped in shock, expecting to see him crushed, but instead he stood steady, his blade still ready, his eyes calm. The Gladiator growled. You are fast, she spat, her voice echoing in the dust. But speed will not save you for long. She raised her sword again and struck once more, faster this time. Again, the human dodged, his movements sharp, clean, and precise. Every step he took left only the faintest mark in the sand. His body moved like water flowing around stone, always slipping past her attacks. The crowd, who had laughed earlier, now shouted with surprise. This was not what they had expected. The Gladiator swung again, this time from the side, aiming to cut him in half. The Marine raised his smaller blade, and the clash rang out across the arena. Sparks flew. Steel screamed against alien metal, and for the first time the human held his ground. The crowd roared in disbelief. Her strength was overwhelming. The impact pushed him back, his boots sliding across the sand. Up. But he did not fall. He dug his heels in and steadied himself. His arms trembled for a moment, but his eyes never wavered. He pushed her blade aside with a quick twist of his wrist and stepped back, regaining balance. The Gladiator's mocking smile faded. She had fought countless enemies, beasts larger than ships and warriors trained for centuries, but none had stood against her like this tiny human. His size, his weapon, his silence, it all made no sense. Yet here he was, still standing. The crowd began to murmur. Whispers spread like fire. Could the human fight back? Could he actually survive? The Gladiator growled and rushed forward, her heavy boots pounding like drums of war. She swung again and again, her blade cutting through the air like lightning. Each strike was strong enough to crush bones, to shatter shields, to split stone. But each time the human moved just enough to escape. A step back, a sidestep, a block at the perfect angle. His every move felt too precise, too controlled. It was not luck. Skill. The crowd leaned forward, unable to look away. The Gladiator was attacking with the fury of a storm, but the human was reading her movements like an open book. He was not fighting to win yet. He was learning. Every dodge, every block, every shift of his feet told him more about her rhythm, her timing, her weaknesses. Finally, after a series of wild swings, she left her side exposed for just a second. The human moved instantly. His blade flashed in, the light striking her armor. A loud metallic crack rang out as sparks flew. The cut was shallow, only scratching the surface of her chest plate, but it was enough. The crowd gasped again. The champion had been touched. The Gladiator stepped back, her eyes wide in disbelief. No one had ever marked her armor before, or no one had ever made her bleed. Her pride burned hotter than fire, and for the first time in her long career, she felt anger, not the joy of battle, but true anger. You dare? She growled, her voice shaking with rage. Her eyes blazed red, her chest heaving.
Ah.
She raised her blade with both hands, the ground cracking beneath her as she prepared to strike with all her might. The human said nothing. He stood calm, blade at his side, his eyes watching her every move. His silence was louder than her roars, and it shook her more than the scratch on her armor. The crowd no longer laughed. Their cheers had turned to shouts, half for the Gladiator, Half for the human, they wanted blood. They wanted victory. But most of all, they wanted to see what would happen next. The gladiator charged. Her blade glowing with energy, her strength focused in one final strike, meant to end the fight in a single blow. She roared, the sound tearing through the air. The human lowered his stance, gripping his blade tighter, waiting for the perfect moment, and then, in the blink of an eye, their blades clashed again. Sparks lit up the arena, dust rose high into the sky, and the sound of metal against metal rang like a bell across the stars. This was no longer a fight of size or strength. This was a battle of wills. The dust from the last clash still hung in the air, swirling like smoke over a battlefield. The crowd shouted in a frenzy, half cheering for their champion, half gasping at the human survival. The alien gladiator stood tall, her chest heaving, her massive blade glowing faintly with energy. The human marine stood opposite her, shoulders steady, his smaller weapon glinting with sparks from the impact. But while the crowd saw chaos, the marine saw patterns. Every strike she made, every step she took, every flicker of anger in her eyes, all of it was information. He was not fighting blindly, he was reading her. He remembered his training. Humans, though weaker in body, were unmatched in strategy. He had been taught to study not just the enemy's strength but also their weaknesses, hidden in plain sight. And now, in the center of the alien Colosseum, used that knowledge. The gladiator roared and charged again, her heavy boots pounding like war drums. She swung wide, her enormous blade cutting the air with deadly speed. The crowd gasped, expecting the human to be crushed. But once more he sidestepped, barely moving enough to let the strike pass. Dust blew across his armor, but he remained untouched. Her attacks were strong, yes, but they were predictable. Too much force, too much weight, too much pride. She wanted to show dominance, not control. The marine's eyes narrowed. He noticed her pattern, a downward strike, a sweeping side slash, then a heavy overhead blow. She repeated it again and again, relying on the same rhythm that had crushed hundreds of enemies before him. But to him, it was becoming a song he could anticipate. The crowd still believed she was in control. They cheered her every move, stomping their feet and chanting her name. But some began to notice something strange. Why was the human never struck? Why did he always seem to move just in time? The gladiator's mocking laughter returned, but it sounded forced. "You run well, little human?" she taunted, circling him again. "But running cannot win a fight. Show me your strength before I tear you apart." The marine did not answer. His silence pressed on her nerves like a weight. She swung again, harder this time, her blade striking sparks from the ground. He dodged, countered lightly, then stepped back. Each time, his movements became sharper, faster, more confident. The whispers in the crowd grew. Is he learning her moves? Does he look so calm? The gladiator growled, her pride burning hotter. She struck again, her blade crashing down with the weight of a collapsing star. The human raised his weapon, deflecting just enough to slide out of reach. But in that moment, his blade tapped her armor, a tiny strike that left another faint scratch. The sound was small, but it echoed like thunder in her ears. Her breathing grew heavier. Sweat trickled under her armor. She had never needed this much effort against an opponent before. She swung faster, harder, but her strikes became less precise, her rhythm breaking. The human pressed her further, forcing her to waste energy. Forcing her to grow impatient. He was controlling the battle without ever landing a killing blow. Finally, she screamed and swung with all her rage, a massive overhead strike meant to crush him once and for all. The human ducked low, rolled beneath her swing, and as he rose, his blade sliced across the side of her leg. The cut was shallow, but blood spilled into the sand. The crowd went silent.
Ow.
For the first time, the champion bled. The gladiator stumbled. Back, eyes wide, fury boiling in her veins. She had been scratched before, but not like this. Not by someone so small, someone she had mocked as weak. Her anger threatened to blind her. She roared at the crowd as if their cheers could cover her humiliation. The human stood tall, his blade steady, his eyes locked on her. He had no need for words. His strategy was clear. He would let her strength destroy itself. The crowd erupted, torn between shock and excitement. Some still shouted for the champion, but others now cheered for the human. The tide of voices shook, the Colosseum like a storm. The gladiator clenched her blade tighter, her pride demanding victory. But the Marine had already taken control. He had turned her arrogance into her weakness, and every passing second pulled her closer to defeat. In that moment, the lesson became clear. Brute strength could shake the ground, but strategy could change the course of destiny, and the human was only just beginning. The sand beneath the champion's feet was no longer her stage, it was her prison. Blood dripped from the shallow cut on her leg, each drop burning her pride more than her flesh. The Colosseum, once filled with roaring laughter, now shook with uncertain voices. For the first time, the alien gladiator was not in complete control. The human Marine stood across from her, his blade steady, his breathing calm, his posture unbroken. He had taken her rhythm, her confidence, her strength, and turned them into weapons against her. The crowd could feel it. Something had shifted. The gladiator bared her teeth, her deep voice booming. "Enough games," she roared, slamming her massive sword into the ground with a shockwave that rattled the arena walls. "You will not shame me before my people." She charged, fury blazing in her eyes, each swing faster and heavier than before. Sparks flew, sand exploded, steel screamed with every strike, yet the human was no longer only dodging, he was countering. Her downward slash met his blade angled perfectly, sliding her strike off to the side. Before she could recover, he stepped in and sliced across her shoulder. The blow cut deep enough to spark pain beneath her armor. The crowd gasped. Their undefeated champion had staggered. Her anger boiled hotter, but it made her careless. Swung wide, too wide. The Marine ducked under her weapon and drove his boot into her knee. She stumbled forward, dropping to one leg for a moment. Her giant frame suddenly clumsy. The human didn't waste the chance. His blade flashed again, scoring another mark across her arm. It was not a killing strike, but it was enough to remind everyone watching the tide of the battle had turned. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed her name desperately. Others shouted for the human, their voices colliding into a storm of noise. For centuries, no one had touched her. No one had made her bleed. No one had forced her to kneel. Yet this human, this fragile creature, had done it within minutes. The gladiator roared and rose again, her chest heaving, her pride refusing to collapse. She lifted her massive sword and swung down with all her fury. The human stepped too. The side encountered with a slash to her ribs, sparks bursting as his blade dug through her armor. She cried out in pain, a sound the crowd had never heard from her before. The human's expression never changed. He moved like a machine of discipline and focus, his strikes sharp, his timing flawless. He was no longer just defending, he was advancing. Step by step, he pushed her back. Her movements grew heavier, her breaths rougher. Swung less precisely, her strength draining with each missed strike. The Marine, smaller and lighter, conserved his energy, his eyes never leaving hers. He was not fighting for pride. He was fighting for survival, and survival demanded patience. Then came the moment that silenced even the loudest voice in the Colosseum. The gladiator lifted her weapon high for a crushing overhead blow. The human stepped forward, not backward, and his blade slashed across her hand. She cried out, her grip loosening. Her enormous sword fell into the sand with a thunderous crash. The sound echoed through the arena like the fall of a mountain. The crowd froze, their champion weaponless. The human raised his blade, pressing forward, his presence commanding. The gladiator stumbled back, her eyes wide, her breath shallow. For the first time in her life, she looked afraid. The Marine stopped just short of her throat, his blade gleaming under the arena lights. He didn't strike. He didn't need to. His calm eyes told her what words never could. The fight is over. I own this moment. The gladiator fell to her knees, her massive frame trembling. Blood dripped down her arm, staining the sand beneath her. The same alien who had mocked him as weak, who had promised to break him, now looked up at him in disbelief. The crowd erupted again, but this time not with pure support for their champion. Voices screamed for the human. Some cheered his name. Others shouted in anger, unable to believe their warrior had fallen so low. Today. But no one could deny what they had seen. The tide had turned. The human had broken the unbreakable. The Marine lowered, his blade slightly, his silence more powerful than any speech. He had proven that strategy could cut deeper than strength. Patience could outlast rage. And the alien gladiator, once a giant above all others, now knelt in the sand. The taste of humiliation bitter on her lips. The Colosseum had never heard silence like this. Thousands of voices that once screamed for blood were now frozen in shock. Their mighty champion, the alien giant, was on her knees, her massive sword lying useless in the sand. The human Marine stood before her, his smaller blade pointed at the ground, his breathing calm, his eyes unshaken. The crowd did not know what to do, sheer rage or tremble. They had seen the impossible. The gladiator lifted her head slowly, her eyes burning with shame and fury. Her body trembled not from fear, but from exhaustion. She had never bled this much in a fight, never lost her weapon, never been forced down. Before anyone, rage exploded in her chest. She roared so loud that the sound shook the stone walls of the arena with one desperate movement. She lunged forward, her claws reaching for the human's throat. The crowd gasped, expecting the Marine to be caught. But in one swift motion, he sidestepped, his blade flashing with precise speed. The edge stopped just short of her neck, close enough to feel the heat of his weapon near her skin. The gladiator froze, her claws inches from his chest. The audience held their breath. That moment, sharp as a blade itself, stretched into eternity. She realized the truth he had wanted. He could have ended her right then. Her arms fell to her sides. For the first time in her long reign of victories, she lowered her head, not in arrogance, but in defeat. But the breaking point was not just in her body. It was in her spirit, her pride, her arrogance, her endless belief that no one could touch. Her shattered. She remembered mocking the human before the fight, calling him weak, fragile, worthless. Now, she was the one kneeling, trembling in the sand. The crowd erupted into chaos. Half screamed for her to rise, half shouted the human's name. Some wept in disbelief, others cheered as if history itself had been rewritten. The noise clashed like thunder, filling every corner of the Colosseum. The gladiator panted heavily, her voice rough as she growled, "Why? Why do you not finish it? Strike me down and prove your strength." The human's eyes remained steady, his silence sharper than any insult. Slowly he lowered his blade. The gesture spoke louder than words. "I do not need to kill you to prove. I have already won." That silence crushed her more than any wound. Her knees sank deeper into the sand. Her claws curled into fists, but she did not rise. Her head bowed as the reality set in. She, the undefeatable champion, had begged for mercy. Without even speaking the word, the crowd's chanting grew wild. Some shouted in anger, demanding blood. Others cheered, unable to resist the shock of seeing a human defeat the mightiest warrior of their people. The tension split the arena in two, like a battlefield divided by belief. The gladiator finally looked up at him, her voice breaking, no longer filled with arrogance but with something new: fear. "You are not what I thought. You are not weak." Her words echoed across the sand, a confession witnessed by thousands. The Marine said nothing, only turned slightly, stepping back, his blade still ready but not raised. His silence became his victory speech, and in that silence, the alien gladiator's spirit collapsed completely. Her pride cracked. Her knees pressed deeper into the ground. Her voice, once mocking and strong, now softened, trembling as she whispered the words no one thought they would ever hear: "Mercy." The Colosseum shook not from roars of triumph, but from disbelief. Their giant had fallen. Their warrior had begged, Their pride had been shattered by the one species they had mocked above all others. The human marine stood above her, shadow stretching long across the arena floor. He had not needed size. He had not needed brute strength. His patience, his discipline, his strategy had carried him to this moment, and in this moment, the galaxy itself seemed to shift. The arena was no longer roaring. It was trembling. Thousands of aliens stood frozen, their voices caught in their throats. The image before them was one they had never imagined. Their undefeated champion kneeling in the sand, her giant frame bent, her weapon discarded, her head lowered. And above her stood the human marine, smaller, quieter, yet unbroken, his blade resting by his side. This was not just a battle anymore, it was history. The gladiator's lips trembled as she repeated the words she thought she would never speak. Mercy. Her voice was weak, nothing like the roar that once shook the Colosseum. It carried not arrogance, not anger, but surrender. The crowd gasped in unison. Some screamed in fury, demanding their champion rise again. Others stood in silence, shocked that the word had even left her mouth. No one could deny it. The unshakable giant had fallen to the one she mocked as fragile. The human marine did not move quickly. He stepped closer with calm precision, his blade still lowered. His silence carried a weight heavier than any speech. He looked down at her, his eyes steady, not filled with cruelty, but with something far greater understanding. The gladiator raised her eyes slowly. Her pride shattered, her voice shaking. Why? Why do you not kill me? I spare one who spat on you, who mocked your kind. The human finally spoke, his voice steady, low, and clear, echoed across the Colosseum like a bell of truth. Because strength is not about breaking others. He said, his words simple but cutting deeper than any blade. It is about enduring, about standing when the world wants you on your knees. You mocked humanity for being small, fragile, weak. But today, you learned our strength is not in size, it is in will. The silence that followed was louder than thunder. The gladiator lowered her head again, her chest rising and falling. As her pride melted into humility, she whispered, "Then I was blind, and today I see." The crowd stirred uneasily. They had come for blood, for a brutal show. But what they received was something else, something that shook the foundations of their beliefs. The human had not just defeated their champion. He had defeated the very idea that size and power alone ruled the galaxy. The marine turned his back to her, an act no one expected. He walked slowly across the sand, his blade lowered, his shoulders strong. Leaving his enemy alive was not weakness, it was proof of dominance. He had nothing left to prove. Behind him, the gladiator rose shakily to her feet. She did not roar. She did not lift her weapon. Instead, she raised her hand high, signaling surrender for all to see. The Colosseum fell into chaos. Some booed, others wept. Many shouted, but one truth spread across them like fire. The legend of their champion was over, and in its place, a new legend had been born, the legend of the human who stood against a giant and made her kneel. As the marine reached the arena gates, he stopped for a moment and looked back. His eyes swept across the endless sea of alien faces, spoke again, his voice carrying with the strength of a soldier who had faced countless battles. Never mistake silence for weakness. Never mistake patience for fear. Never mistake humanity for prey. His words cut through the Colosseum like lightning, searing themselves into the minds of all who heard. The gates opened, and the human walked out, his figure swallowed by the shadows beyond. But his presence lingered in the arena long after he was gone. The gladiator remained standing in the center, her head bowed, her weapon still abandoned in the sand. She whispered softly, but her words carried farther than she knew. Respect. For the humans, for the first time in generations, the galaxy's proudest warriors bowed their heads not in shame, but in recognition. Humanity had proven itself not by brute strength, but by spirit. The lesson was carved into the very stones of the arena. True power was not about towering above others, it was about refusing to fall, no matter how small you seemed. And from that day onward, no one in the stars dared mock humanity again.